Would it have been possible for America to have been ideologically captured by Nazism, fascism, or communism? All three ideologies got a small toehold in the US population. We had the Fascist League of America, the Bund movement, the Silver League, and the communists have had small boil movements in the US for a long time. Sorry to the political romantics, but ideologies like this don't take over from countries from the bottom up. They are either adopted by the establishment allows it to happen, or the establishment fractures and some faction of the establishment allies themselves to that movement. Establishments that are hard to join tend to become brittle. They fracture when change comes too quickly, and the factions end up allying with the large populist groups for leverage. The US establishment is not, and really never has been, brittle. Change comes from within because new blood is always joining. Madison's goal was to create an inclusive establishment. It didn't turn out exactly the way he intended, but the inclusive part took hold. So, Nazis taking over the US makes great literature and visual spectacle for media content. It is obnoxiously loud and eye-searing because it looks so alien. When embraced as fiction, it's almost always cartoonish. National Socialist ideology has race hierarchy as its first critical component. If you have no master race, it's not real National Socialism. The very flexible US establishment had been dealing with race issues from its inception. The Civil War imposed an understood settlement of the issue, which was refined by the Compromise of 1877. Voluntary mass deportations had been tried and failed. If no political will for forced mass deportations could be mustered before 1900, it was unlikely that a new radical consensus of the establishment would suddenly manifest. Although the races of the US weren't sitting around the campfire singing Kumbaya, the long haul consensus of the establishment was that black Americans were part of the social fabric for the future to come. Now, a critical element of National Socialism race theory also required Volk. The Germans had 100 years of mysticism and folklore entwined around the German Volk that made it function almost on a borderline theological level. At best, the US had the melting pot and an Anglo Saxon Protestant ideal stamped on the American identity. It was unifying, but in no way foundational, as even the WASPs were identifying as some form of hyphenated American, and non WASPs recognized that there were cultural Old World homeland differences and ties they adhered to, and they didn't disappear when they immigrated in, nor did they disappear after a few generations. So, despite some German Americans LARPing at Nazism, the American establishment was effectively immune to it. A pure Marxian overthrow of our system was out of the question for the same reason. The American establishment is open for anyone with the money, talent, or correct positioning, as long as they're willing to compromise to advance a position. A typical person or entity in the American establishment can always see a path forward to their dearest issue. That means that people who are the most capable of affecting revolution were already co opted by the American establishment as it was the most pragmatic engine of change. If you were ideologically communist and pragmatic, revolution was no sure path. The establishment could get part of what you wanted if you knew how to play the game. Now, socialism gets a little bit more flaky because of the definitional issues of it. So at this point, I'm speaking solely of social democrats, the philosophy of using the electorate to advance socialism at the pace the electorate is willing to tolerate. Now, the American establishment is progressive. Progressivism gained ascendancy in the late 1800s and has been a dominant force in American establishment ever since. So, from this point on, I am speaking of the progressive movement through World War II, Following World War II, the nature of the establishment evolved. Progressives at times will adopt socialistic stances. Typically, they do it for very unsocialistic reasons. European Social Democrats are an artifact of the revolutions of 1840. These revolutions had minimal support from the establishment, so therefore they failed. The European establishments recognized that they were sitting on a pressure tank that was certain to blow at some point. They enacted reform by giving Social Democrats a platform to enact limited and incremental socialist changes. American progressives were a product of the post-Civil War Enlightenment that swept colleges, media, and eventually the government. It was a very impatient ideology. It didn't damn the free market as socialists did. It disliked the slow pace that society and the markets had to what they perceived as the ills of society. Most initial progressive reforms centered on empowering the WASP class and anybody who wanted to go along for the ride with that empowerment. Conversely, many of the progressive goals sought to find ways to diminish and undermine the political power of non-WASP immigrants. Progressives are nationalists. Socialists are internationalists. Progressives are the ruling class. Socialists see class conflict as a problem. Progressives see themselves as the betters, capable of identifying the social issues of their lessers that can be fixed more quickly with a wartime-style power at government disposal. Socialists see almost all social issues via the class conflict lens. Therefore, socialists would view alcohol as an industry they want to tax, regulate, and hopefully one day control the means of production thereof. Progressives would want to ban alcohol in order to destroy the power bases that resided in the saloons of the ward bosses of the big city political machines. Socialists would abhor war, as the workers of the world would be fighting each other. Progressives would see war as a power play to spread the American progressive system to the world. Some democratic socialists would certainly have worked their way into the establishment and might have helped steer certain socialistic ideas. Progressives neither accepted or abhorred socialistic ideas merely due to their origin. They picked and rejected these ideas depending on their usefulness to progressive ideals. Now, the U.S. establishment did have a bit of a panic attack going into the Great Depression. The National Recovery Administration strongly took on many aspects of Italian fascism. Before you argue coincidence, the NRA was explicitly compared to the corporate state model by the New York Times. Mussolini himself recognized the similarities. Hugh S. Johnson, who led the NRA, admired aspects of the Italian fascism and distributed a fascist tract called The Corporate State, written by Bruno Biaggi, a key fascist economist. The CCC and WPA work programs had to be toned down a lot because when they were initially brought up, they looked a lot too much like similar Italian and German labor corps. Progressives and fascists have similar concerns. Italy had only been a unified country for 50 years, previously made up of multiple kingdoms. Their goal of nationalism was similar to the progressives trying to meld immigrants into one national entity. If American communists and socialists had a more nihilistic streak, like perhaps the Russians or the Italian anarchists, they might have been able to stir things up far greater than they did. And this could have pushed the US establishment to try to bring order by adopting many more facets of fascism. In reality, the bomb throwers in the US were too disorganized to pull it off. Another possibility is if the Great Depression had been far worse than it had been. It doesn't seem too far out that the US establishment would have adopted additional fascist ideas beyond what they already had. So, active communists or a bad economy might have fostered fascism, but not communism or National Socialism. So, did fascism in America have a chance to take over America? I would say far more likely than National Socialism or communism. However, I consider the likelihood of communism and National Socialism taking hold to be as close to non existent as possible. Fascism had a better chance by comparison, but even that was only a tiny outside chance. All right, in the comment section below, what do you think? Do you think any of those ideologies had a better chance than I thought they did? Any items in here that you want me to expand on in future videos? Let me know in the comments below. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm has brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, check out my other titles. I get into lots of things. You'll find stuff you like. It's worth subscribing. And if you know somebody who might find this interesting, share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.